I have Beauty and the Beast.
Oh.
And I'm just, why? Just like I'm lamenting this thing. Like Disney has just been on this tear remaking their old films. And apparently nothing is sacred. So it's Beauty and the Beast. Emma Watson is Belle. Dan Stevens is the Beast. And there's like a parade of stars in this cast. It's Emma Thompson as Mrs. Potts. Ian McKellen is Cogsworth. Ewan McGregor is Lumiere. Kevin Kline is Maurice. It's got Josh Gad as LeFou and Luke Evans as Gaston. And I do have to say, Luke Evans literally looks like the human embodiment of a cartoon. So I was like, all right, good job, casting department. And he can sing, it turns out. This is my problem. In this remake, they literally recreated some of the most famous scenes and songs, shot for shot, word for word, lyric for lyric. And I was just like, what the heck is going on here? If you're going to pick something so iconic to do, change it. At least the prior Disney live action remakes have had a little bit of a spin on it, or there's been a reason for making it live action, except for maybe the Cinderella one. But in this one, any of the changes they did make were not for the better. The film is 45 minutes longer than its predecessor, and it's all just bloated. And there are maybe 2 plot points during the entire thing that I was like, okay, maybe that adds some value to this. I really like Emma Watson and what she stands for as a person, right? As an actress, in my mind, she's still Hermione Granger. But my goodwill towards her as a person, I think, was integral in me not utterly hating this film. Because I get it, right? If you're this like young movie star who spends all of your free time fighting for women's equality and humanitarian rights, how can you blame someone like that for taking on a role that's about literacy and like women being able to read medieval? You're like, I get it. I get why you did this, but I still hate that they remade this. So they added in this whole plot thing about how Belle, like they added up the stuff about Belle being ostracized for being smart. And I'm like, this is ridiculous, but it's sad that this is probably still relevant today. You know, it's like their love of literature becomes more of a part of the relationship between her and the Beast, which is like, okay, I guess this is, sure, why not? At least it's like a common ground thing as opposed to just, you're in a castle together. The other thing they explain a little bit more about is the curse in the beginning, because if you remember the first one, it's just like this enchantress casts a curse on this teenage kid for not letting a total stranger in his castle and like curses the entire staff. And it's like, it seems a little excessive for, punishment for that. So they added like a preview or a prologue that kind of explains a little bit more. And I was like, okay, all right, that's an acceptable change. And that's where the positive changes end. I was just like...
In the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning, pretty much. I was like so frustrated with this whole thing. Because when you recreate the original so closely, how am I as an audience member not supposed to sit there and just go, well, this was different. Well, this is exactly the same. Well, this is from the animated one. Well, this isn't in the animated one. Like, you're just inviting that comparison. And so I spent the entire movie distracted. And then let's talk about some of the creepy stuff they added.
Uh-oh.
The Beast is almost all CG for this film, right? But he has Dan Stevens' very real human eyes. And I was just like, I don't like what's happening here. Like, it's one thing when you're cartoonified and there's this thing called the uncanny valley, and it has to do with how we perceive CG characters. And like, if you see a CG human that's too perfect, you're gonna get freaked out by it.
Yeah.
So it's when something is a creature or a character like that, you're not necessarily going to be that. But when you give it human eyes, suddenly you're starting to fall into this like, that's too real. Like, I don't like this. And so there'd be shots where they'd like show his like very blue eyes. I was like, no, don't like this. Don't like where this is going. And again, it's one thing to see a cartoon 2D woman fall in love with an equally cartoony like man, gorilla, lion, buffalo. It's a totally different thing to see her doing it with this like human size or life size like CG rendering of it with the human eyeballs. And I was like, this is creepy. And CG has come a long way, but it did not work for me on this one. There are scenes where she's supposed to put her hand on his arm and you can just see like the lack of interaction. I'm gesturing right now. No one can see because we're on the radio, but like her hand is just like not all, it's like hovering, and where there should be fur and interaction, it is two tactile things. And why did they not just shove an arm in a furry thing and just like show anything from a different angle? Why were they committed to recreating this exact shot and therefore creeping us all out? I was really frustrated. I'm like, everyone needs to stop being so CG happy. All the house characters are all CG. I don't like what's happening here either. Cogsworth was maybe fine, but Lumiere has limbs, and if you remember, like, it's a candlestick, right?
Yeah.
No, he has, his arms are now things, and he has legs. In the original, he's like one-legged thing, and he's hopping around a bunch, and it's funny, it's cartoony. This, he's allowed to have legs. I'm like, what's the point? Like,
He's
there's
dancing.
no... Right, he dances a lot. I'm like, there's no constraints here. Like, why? Again, every few minutes during this movie, I'd be like, why? Why is this happening?
Straying so far from the original idea.
But
right?
no, that's the problem. Too close to the original idea, but the changes were not far enough, right? Because again, you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I remember Be Our Guest. Like, this is the same thing that happens. And then you're like, oh, but wait, that's different. It was a very jilting experience. And then the final thing is there's this big controversy, right, over LeFou, who's played by Josh Gad. And spoilers, he's gay. Except for, it's not spoilers if you ever saw the original one, because he was always gay for Gaston. They just didn't acknowledge it. And so there's this one teeny tiny micro moment that's, subtly showing that, he probably likes men. And of course, homophobes are in uproar boycotting this movie. I'm like, hey, let's take a step back and talk about the fact that this film is about a woman with Stockholm syndrome who is in love with a man, gorilla, lion, buffalo.
Yeah.
But let's get offended about 5 seconds of a gay guy. Like,
Right.
I'm just like, everyone needs to get over themselves. So here's my thing. If you're going to desecrate the original, please make it original enough so that people go, I got something new out of this. I feel like I got a different experience. Don't leave them leaving the theater. I was like, I want to just go watch the original, which is exactly what I did. I went home and I watched the original again. If you're going to bankrupt your artistic integrity, do it for a reason, not just for money, which is what this clearly is. And I have to say, like, Emma Watson, only reason I didn't completely get enraged about this, and that they didn't mess up the music, right? Because they just lifted the music, it's like, okay, well, I guess if I close my eyes, I can kind of, it's kind of like a reinterpretation of it and different people singing. And it just makes me really sad that this is going to be a new generation's, like, version of this film, right? For me, the original was so iconic, and it's not a perfect film, but it was such a part of my childhood and, like, a bunch of people's childhood since. And now this is it, and I'm like, ugh. Why?
And kids now are going to see the old one and they're going to be like, oh, that's so dumb and boring.
Right. But I'm like, no, that one at least was concise, and it was, it was sweet, and it was well drawn, and like there's a bunch of technological achievements, and the music is amazing. So I don't know. I think people are going to see it anyway, but I don't have any particular desire to. Maybe I have the desire to see it again, just to be like, maybe I can disengage from trying to compare it. But
so, what would you say is the rating for this one? I'm very.
I know. I think Emma Watson is the only reason I'm not going to completely slam this one. I'm going to give it 3.5 because if you were a little kid, I guess it's fine. And
I see 3.5 as actually a pretty positive.
Yeah,
right, because I was like, it's not like a horrible film, but for me, or any probably adult or even like teenager or like slightly older kid, you're going to sit there comparing it. Yeah. So again, if it was like a fresh experience and you'd never seen the first one somehow, you'd be like, oh, this is a fine movie. This is really great music. I like these actors. Yeah. So, I'm trying to look for like all audience rating is probably 3.5.
And your description again of the Beast?
Oh, man, gorilla, lion, buffalo?
Yeah.
I think that's perfect. I've seen the photos.
That is exactly
him.
how the directing animator has described him. And he talks about how they designed it and they pulled all these creature things. And they're like, yeah, he's got like the horns of a buffalo and like the nose of this. And so, it's like, that's a pretty mishmash thing to fall in love with here. It's even creepier when it's like a 7-foot tall, like fur rendering of it.
If you're with kids, you're going to go see it.
Oh, I will say the one thing they did pump up was the rating. So it went from G to PG. And I was like, yeah, some of this is a little bit scarier. The wolf scenes and all this stuff. And I actually had nightmares about Beauty and the Beast as a kid. I had a recurring nightmare about this film, which is why my parents made me stop watching it. Because he gets like attacked and there's a lot of like roaring and screaming, and then add in realistic looking things. And you're like, oh, good luck with that, parents. Like, have fun with the kids not sleeping tonight.
So, Dana, you have a second film for us right now, a Ewan McGregor double feature. And this is the one I'm interested to go see.
Yes, it's T2 Trainspotting, and it's about as opposite a role as Ewan McGregor could get, right? Like former heroin junkie and human man candlestick. Like pretty polar opposites. But yeah, it's the sequel to Trainspotting, and it took them 21 years to make this sequel. And I love the first film so much. I love both the original films in this week's theme very much, and so it's weird to see a recreation and then also see a sequel and feel very differently about them. Mm-hmm. So this film reunites Ewan McGregor and Johnny Lee Miller, Robert Carlyle, and Ewan Bremner with the original director, Danny Boyle, who's gone to crazy things since. He's won an Academy Award. He's directed a bunch of great films. It's set, again, in Scotland, and basically the cast is 20 years older and not much wiser. And it's weird because, again, both this and Beauty and the Beast have such, like, impactful soundtracks, right? Like, all you need is a few notes of these songs, and you're like, you'll be sitting there and you'll be like, oh, I'm back when I was seeing the original. And whereas with Beauty and the Beast, it's a little strange because you're still trying to recreate it. Trainspotting knows what they're doing with that, and they use it really well. So they're using it to call back to the original one, but they also are aware that, hey, we're a sequel, and so they balanced it really well. And what I love that they did with the music is that they remixed a lot of it. So it's still the original songs, but then they're remixing it because they're like, oh, okay, well, we need an adjustment on this. If you haven't seen the original film, you probably shouldn't see this one because it will make exactly no sense to you. But I highly recommend the original one, so then I suggest seeing this one afterwards. There's a ton of elements just plot-wise and tonally similar to the original, but I think they were self-aware enough to know when to reference the first and when to bring in stuff anew. For me, I love the first one so much that I was really happy to see they were doing a sequel and also really apprehensive. And I think, again, the filmmakers knew, hey, it's been 20 years in the making. People are going to have high expectations for this. And I don't think anybody was like, hey, you have to make a sequel to this cult classic indie film about heroin junkies, right? So they had the chance. They had enough time to go, this is what we want to make the film about. We finally figured out what it's about. I think it actually kind of justified it. And one of the interesting things is the first one's kind of about music and youth and all this stuff. This one is, and drugs, but this one is more about aging and kind of the relationships that, and aging is a very universal thing, whether or not we want it to be. And so I think actually a wider audience could probably relate more to it just because it's like a bunch of family dynamics and this group of friends. It's like what happens when you spend 20 years apart and come back together and you see each other again. It's not perfect by any means, and the first one was really groundbreaking, and this one is not that because the first one obviously like sort of laid that
already broke the
right,
ground.
exactly.
Yeah.
You can't, but it's treading there, and I don't think it will disappoint you, right? Like if you came to see these characters because you love them so much, even though they're like kind of despicable hooligans, you're gonna love them again in this one. They're not different enough that, for better or for worse, that you're going to be like shocked and surprised. Like, this is a total unexpected thing. So I think if you want to revisit these characters, because I do think a lot of people are huge fans, like this is a pretty decent kind of homage to the Trainspotting fandom. And
You're saying it's half new stuff, half old stuff.
yeah, half in terms of like music and honestly plot.
So since it's been 20 years since the original came out, 21 years, good idea to go back and watch the first. I mean, because I haven't seen the original Trainspotting probably since it came out.
Yeah.
And you're saying that the best way to you need to have seen the first film to really kind of understand this?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you have seen it and you vaguely remember that it's about these four guys and like some of the plot stuff that happens in the first one, which does get referenced, so you'd be like very shocked suddenly if you're like, and that they're junkies, like that's obviously a huge thing. If you'd seen it once and you kind of remember some of the plot context, like you could probably just Wikipedia and like remember and be like, oh yeah, that happens and build off of it. But if you had no idea like hijinks of the first one, you need to see it. I still recommend if you want, go see the first one again first. But if you don't have time, I think it's safe to jump into this one if you just give yourself a quick refresher.
Dana, tell us how many Mohawks this movie gets.
I'm going to give it 3.7.
Okay, just a little bit better than your Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah. Well, it's 0.2 better. It's, it's relative.
Yeah.
I think her ratings are kind of like, the seismograph, earthquake. It's even though it's only 0.2, it's like 20 times or what is it? 200 times more powerful.
There you go.
It's the difference between like a C and a B, right? Like if you do the math on out of 5, it becomes like, oh, this is something that I'd like be willing to see again. Like I've seen Trainspotting 2 like twice, and
wow.
but I was like, Beauty and the Beast, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I watched the original. That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what does this make me want to do afterwards?